It is important to inform you that the person who killed Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother was someone who called himself a Hebrew Israelite, and his theological convictions is what drove him to do this. I do that by beginning to read from a book called Black Judaism, Story of an American Movement by James Landing, on page 368. Early Sunday morning, June 30th, 1974, a young black man arrived by bus in Atlanta, Georgia, and walked to the Ebenezer Baptist Church, pastored by Dr. Martin Daddy Luther King Sr., the father of the civil rights leader who had been slain in Memphis on April 4th, 1968. The young man, attired in a tan suit and tie, attracted little notice as he attended Sunday school at Ebenezer, a church noted for its visitors. At the regular church service, Mrs. Alberta W. King, Dr. King's wife, was serving as guest organist since the normal choir was not singing in favor of older choir members who had moved from Atlanta and returned for a reunion. Mrs. King had been the chief organist for years but had resigned several years earlier due to age. She was 69. The Reverend King was not preaching that day, having invited Reverend Calvin Morris, an aide to Mrs. Coretta Scott King, to preach that day. The young man in the tan suit sat in the Amen corner. The choir had just finished singing the Lord's Prayer, and Mrs. King had begun several bars on the organ in preparation for the next hymn when suddenly the young man in the tan suit leaped from his seat, shouted something that sounded like, "I am taking over! I am taking over!" He brandished a pistol in each hand and began firing randomly. After threatening a visiting choir member, Mrs. Lillian Watkins, his guns jammed and he was wrestled to the floor by members of the congregation amidst great confusion. Deacon Edward Boykin lay dead. Mrs. Jimmy Mitchell was wounded, and Mrs. King lay slumped over the organ. She died an hour later in Grady Hospital. The young man in the tan suit was identified as 23-year-old Marcus Wayne Chenault Jr. of Dayton, Ohio. He had withdrawn from classes at Ohio State, where he was, if you read the whole paragraph, from all classes the previous December, but maintained his room in Columbus, that's where I'm from, several blocks from the university. Now, I'm going to skim through some of this, and here's the interesting part why I'm reading this. He says the real target was Dr. King, that's Martin's father, but he fired at those who were closest to him. And Reverend King inquired who the enemy was, and the man, Chenault, replied, Christians. And apparently, this man had a death list that included Ralph Abernathy, president of the SCLC. And this is key. At his arraignment, listen to what he said to the judge. Quote, "I am a Hebrew and was sent here on a mission," quote, "and it's partially accomplished." All right, now this goes on, and the reason, though, is because of something he was involved called the Troop that operated in Youngstown, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and again, where I'm from, Columbus. And the Troop's purpose was to kill black ministers and civil rights leaders who members of the group felt had deceived and falsely led black people. So, theology matters, folks. The reason why we're going to dip into some of this history is not because we're saying everyone is going to do this. We're not saying everyone would do this or thinks that they should do this. It's affiliated with it. And we really got into some of the detailed history of the group known as the Hebrew Israelites. Really, it's multiple groups under one religious name kind of grouped together because this religious group has really one main thesis in common. That is, those folks who are on the Western Hemisphere these days who came over here in some way as a product of the transatlantic slave trade are actually the lost tribes of Israel. That's the main thesis. They believe that the Bible, history, and archaeology proves this, etc., etc. They don't agree on much else, but we've been interacting with some of them, talking about the exegetical claims at points, talking about the historical claims at points, and here we're just doing sort of an expose because I've felt like when I speak to a Hebrew Israelite, which is a growing mission field, we want to do these shows to get more and more people involved in the enterprise of reaching out in love to their neighbors. That's what this is all about, guys. When I speak to them, though, a lot of times they seem to believe this doctrine has always been there. They just kind of thought of it on their own. It's clear that the Bible teaches it. Sometimes there's a real lack of awareness of their own historical development, and we want to educate as best we can as well as offer what I hope is some helpful analysis.